Is social media going to be the death of us all? I mentioned this in a video recently. I was just sort of joking, but when you look at it, it might not be that far off. This is a very complicated topic, and there's going to be a lot of videos because social media is so important to everybody. You're watching me over social media right now. In this video, I really want to talk about writing itself and our ability to send messages to each other instantly. There are a lot of different aspects to social media, so I won't be able to cover everything right now, just the writing portion. Now, believe it or not, we actually live in a very literate country. A lot of you've been around America and might say, Maya, I beg to differ. This is not a very literate country, but it really is. If you look at the numbers, the vast majority of Americans can read and write. They might not know what to do with it, but they know how to read and write. And that's really different because for most of human history, people were farmers. There was no need for them to read or write. Now, of course, we had people who kept track of things. In fact, farming led to the invention of writing because they just needed to keep track of grain and so forth. Writing was very utilitarian initially. Different scholars will say writing originated in different areas. Sumerian scholars think that writing started in ancient Sumer. Ancient Egyptian scholars feel that writing started there. Writing independently developed in ancient China as well as the Americas. So it's not as if these ancient agrarian societies didn't have a system of writing. It's just that most people didn't read or write because they didn't really need to. The only people who needed to read and write were the scribes or the scholars or people in government who needed to help with the bureaucracy, help with the organization. So most people really couldn't read or write. And that didn't seem to be a problem, at least not for stability's purposes. I mean, these ancient societies went on for thousands of years without people knowing how to read and write. Ours is only 250 years old and it's about to tear itself apart because everybody can read and write. But that is beside the point. Right now, we think of literacy as extremely important to a population, but that wasn't always the case. In fact, when the Greeks first got writing, way back in the day, Plato didn't like it. He thought writing would corrupt the youth. In fact, Socrates, his most famous student, quotes him and says that writing is not the elixir of memory, but the elixir of reminding. These kids and their newfangled technologies like writing. Crazy. But he had a point. For thousands of years, in fact, for most of our history, if you need to tell someone something, tell the next generation something, you remembered it. And then you told it to them, like these bards who used to sing these thousands and thousands of line ballads about a story. They knew all of the lines. Their memories were so impressive. They were kind of like the London cabbies that know the entire city of London. Their brains were different. They were formed to remember different things, to remember more things. As you can see, we in a literate society don't really remember that many things because we can look it up. We just save the reference and then somebody else goes and looks it up. In fact, oftentimes we'll just give somebody the reference and then they can go and look it up. So we don't really have memories like that. We can't keep that much information in our brains. We can't memorize an encyclopedia. When someone refers to a person with encyclopedic knowledge, that's what they're talking about. They're talking about this person's memory is so impressive that they were able to absorb all of this information and then regurgitate it in some way. That's what that means. And that was a skill that was part of humans for thousands of years, and we just don't have it anymore. Same thing with online. I remember my mother very rarely needed directions anywhere. She used to read a map or she would ask somebody for directions. And the first time she was told how to get to that place, she remembered it. Like she would literally ask someone on the side of the road, how do you get here? And that person would tell her, and then she would just remember it and get there and never need a reference again. Now, a lot of older people are like, yeah, that's perfectly normal. That's literally how human beings live their lives. But to younger people, that's really amazing because we just go to GPS. We don't need to remember how to get anywhere. We'll just go to our GPS and turn our GPS on. So thousands of years ago, either the Sumerians or the Egyptians established writing. Now, the Sumerians used to write things on little clay tablets, and they would just mark things off, kind of with the edge of a knife kind of thing. A palette knife, not a hack kind of knife, a palette knife. And of course, hieroglyphic writing was more pictorial. What gave the Egyptians the distinct advantage there is that they had papyrus. They didn't have to write on clay tablets. They could write on basically paper. Papyrus is reeds that they get from the Nile, and then they take them out, and then they pound them down, and then they kind of cross-hatch them like you would weave a basket and let them dry. You could write things down on this papyrus that was readily available from the Nile. Now, the Greeks and the Romans also got this papyrus technology. Interesting, the Chinese had paper, but it was like a secret. They didn't tell anybody that they had paper. So they didn't tell anybody else that they had paper or how to make paper. In fact, the Chinese had books. They had like notebooks. They had so much paper. Meanwhile, in Europe, now, after the fall of Rome, Europe didn't have paper for a long, long time. They had parchment. Not like parchment that you bake with. That's basically paper. What they had were animal skins. Animal skins. That's completely insane to me, because every time they wanted to write something down, an animal had to die. Sometimes many animals had to die so that they could write something down. And they didn't just write on it like with a pen. They wrote on it with a quill, so something else had to die so you could get the quill. And then they basically tattooed the animal skin. And that was European writing until they got paper again. That's crazy. The amount of pain and bloodshed that went into a book, and most of the time those books were the Bible. I like to think of the Bible as about love and family and community, but medieval Bibles were literally representations of death and slaughter and pain and heartache. Anyway, yada, yada, yada. China couldn't keep paper a secret forever. Then the Arabs got the paper. Once the Arabs got paper, this became the golden age of Islam. Like science flourished, mathematics flourished. We still use Arabic numerals to this day. They really were able to advance their civilization through paper, through writing. Their knowledge was able to flourish. Different scholars could communicate with each other across distances and build on each other's ideas. This is the beauty of writing. This is why it's slightly better than oral traditions, because you didn't actually have to speak to the person who had all this knowledge. You could see it on paper and you could build off that. Plus, your whole brain wasn't filled with the knowledge. You could actually think about other things. You could add to it. You just referenced the paper. This was very, very important for the golden age of Islam. And then Europe got paper again. And there were more Bibles written. Europe was just obsessed with Bibles. That was like their book forever. Meanwhile, the whole population is completely illiterate. It's like whatever. And then here's the major thing that happened is that Europe got movable type, the printing press. So for those of you who are not familiar with movable type, it's basically like a block. It's similar to wood blocks, but because our alphabet has a set number of letters, you can just put a different letter for the position. So you could basically reprint books. You could print pages. It would take a fraction of the time that it would take in China because China has so many characters. And movable type didn't really work for the Arab world. Despite Europe suffering a tremendous dark age and being thrown out of civilization, it was able to make up all of that time just because it had the good fortune to have an alphabet that worked for movable type. Okay, so what does this have to do with anything? Well, we're in an information age. The rate of change for technology and information in our lifetime is unlike anyone has literally ever seen before. I remember when the internet became a thing and all knowledge everywhere became open for anybody who wanted to look at it. People are still pouring 40s on the sidewalk for the Library of Alexandria. That's how big a hit that was to the knowledge of the world. Now, the Library of Alexandria wouldn't even fill a fraction of YouTube. Just think about that. And our parents saw TV come around. And their parents saw radio, and their parents saw the telegraph. And before that, everyone was doing the same thing for hundreds of years. And before that, before the movable type, they were doing the same thing for thousands of years. It was basically stable. They plateaued. So what can we learn from the invention of the printing press? Well, you'll be happy to know that once the printing press was invented, there was peace across Europe. Psych, there definitely wasn't peace across Europe. There was a major war that killed like 60% of Germans. It was chaos and bloodshed and starvation and just misery for a long, long time. 30 years, actually. More than that. Is that going to happen to us? I hope not. I'm not doing that. I don't do dysentery, and I don't do famine. These are things that I just generally don't mess with. Well, I hope that doesn't happen to us. That's about all I can say on the subject. I do think that we have learned our lessons from the 20th century, but but upon further review, it takes us a long time to learn lessons. So I'm just going to say I don't know if that's going to happen to us or something like that is going to happen to us because of the internet. I hope and I pray that it won't. But we can see the changes it has made in our day-to-day. First and foremost, we text constantly. We're constantly communicating with each other via text, via DM, via messages on Instagram or whatever, or in the comment section. I wonder how many people would maintain conversations with their friends if they had to carve it into clay. Like, what are you doing carved into clay? Is that really worth carving that into clay? I don't know. I think our conversations would be very, very different if we didn't have text. Also, like Plato said, is writing corrupting the youth? It's kind of affecting our ability to have a conversation. I wonder what Plato would have to say about us. Also, the writing as it is done now is so simplified for time because we just have so much to read, so much to see. I know English isn't the most graceful language anyway, it's not Italian or anything, but there is still grace to be seen within the spoken word in English. But that is kind of going away. The joke has been made 1,000 times about how different DMs are versus love letters from back in the day. That sort of art, the art of the spoken word, the art of the written word is kind of falling along the wayside so people can just get out more messages faster and to more people. But what is the quality of these messages? I don't know. That's really something to think about. Are we saying so much and saying absolutely nothing? Also, I have heard a lot from a lot of people that emojis are like Egyptian hieroglyphs. All right, maybe in a way, but hieroglyphs were used by scribes, the most educated people in Egypt. I don't think emojis are being used by the most educated people in the United States. I'm just gonna go out on a limb there. I mean, I'm not doing the research on that one, but I'm gonna say that Neil deGrasse Tyson doesn't send most of his text messages in emoji. Also, the difference between emojis and hieroglyphs is that hieroglyphs were phonetic, which meant that a picture would represent a sound, like ah, ba, and then you can combine those, just like in the letters, to make a word. Whereas the emoji is a straight up symbol for something else. You know, the smiley face emoji isn't a t, and then you combine that with 4 other emojis to be the or those. That's the difference between phonetic and pictographic. So I respect the argument that emojis are the new hieroglyphs, but they're really not. Like, hieroglyphs was an actual written language. Emojis are just an easy way to say something to somebody else when you don't know the words. Because a lot of people don't know the words anymore. We're losing words. We're losing the gift of being able to speak a language. This is very sad because a lot of people only speak the one language and they don't even speak the language. So what are we going to do then? Right now, we're in a place where we have to learn how to control this technology before it starts to control us. A lot of you will say that ship has sailed. The internet, the information age is already controlling us. We are no longer at the reins. That's scary. That having been said, if you are interested in learning more about writing, I highly recommend the recent Nova 2-part series. Also, I highly encourage you to learn more about the dynamic duo of Plato and Socrates, kind of the wisest of the wise. And if you're interested in learning about how the printing press almost destroyed Europe, I'm going to link a few things, especially one by Dan Carlin, about how heretics basically read the Bible for the first time on their own. They became literate, they were able to get access to the Bible, and it ruined the country for a few generations. It did, because it was the Catholics saying, we know how to interpret the Bible, you don't, and Protestants saying like, no, we can read too now, so what are you going to do about that? So that's writing. Where do you think we are right now in the information age? Do you think this is going to work to our advantage, or you think it's going to turn around and bite us in the you-know-what? Subscribe.